is going to be a long video. Today we were blessed with a truck that was a classic case of somebody getting in over their head. Um, Happens. This was supposed to be a motor swap. Something happened, had number 5 piston, scored the wall up, doesn't much matter. This particular truck is getting a bunch of add-ons with it. The truck is the infamous 98.5 to 2002 VP44 24 valve. Very common truck. When people go to buy one and they call me saying, hey, I need a list of things to look for when I buy this truck, this particular truck is getting all those things on that list done, which is going to include a VP44 removal and install. I'll show you how to do that and how to not mess that up. New head with head studs. I'll show you how to stud a head. We are going to do a new exhaust manifold on this, which is a big problem with these trucks, and this one's a great example. I'll show you when the time comes. And we are also new injectors and crossover tubes, which for the first time ever, somebody bought crossover tubes. And I'll show you why that's important when we get in there. With that being said, I'm going to call this video of the 1998 model year. The second gen got a revamp. Although the outside stayed pretty much the same, it got a new plush interior. Some of the later models got rear disc brakes, and of course the new VP44 24 valve engine. Although the motor shared a lot of the common hard parts as its 12 valve predecessor, there's some obvious and large differences between the two. The previous P7100 mechanical injection pump was replaced with a smaller electric diaphragm rotary pump that was able to be controlled electronically for better emissions and more power. The new style head would incorporate 4 valves per cylinder, increasing flow and power overall throughout all RPM ranges. Even though the number's not as impressive as today's standards, you got to remember in 1998, this thing was going up against the now Ford Super Duty with the 7.3, our beloved 7.3, and don't forget the 6.5 Detroit. 6.5 Detroit. It was a monster, especially comparatively to the 5.9 displacement to the 7.3 displacement of the Navistar engine. It was just mind-blowing at the time. And I'm sure if you're watching this or have ever heard of it before, you've done some research, you're going to see the internet has a lot to say about this engine. And I'm going to give you my 2 cents and how I feel about it. First thing they'll say is these things were electrical nightmares. And you know what? I'm going to give it to you. They were. And are. I'll say they still are to an extent. These trucks are very particular with their voltage. These trucks have to see a certain voltage or they are not happy. Like I discussed in the last video about battery terminals. These battery terminals on your second gens were such garbage from the factory, and they just got worse over time. You got to remember, if you have one of these trucks now, it's going on, 20 years plus. Battery terminals are big. Grounds in these trucks were huge. There is a ground wire coming off the harness that going under the alternator bracket that hits a ground on the fender that we'll show you later that had a white noise problem. That ground would pick up interference from the alternator and cause the TPS issues. And it was so drastic, it would cause TPS to fail. And I've had to replace a few. You'd actually get a dead pedal. The truck would go fine and you would just lose throttle. It would idle, but you wouldn't be able to accelerate. Block castings. You hear guys complain about the 53 block, 53 block, 53 block. Don't buy a 53 block. Yes, the 53 block can crack. Is it guaranteed to crack? No. My 24 valve I had never been studded. I ran all the boost through it I possibly could, and at 320,000 miles, when the body finally gave up, block was still intact. Head gasket was blown, block was intact. I wouldn't worry about that too much, especially in 2021. If the truck is clean, good frame, if the Dodge is fine, don't worry about a 53 block. These motors are getting cheap enough. Don't worry about that. Here they'll say the power potential is limited. And by definition, it is. because compared to the P7100, it doesn't have the adjustment to just go wide open. But guys are still making good power with these trucks. I mean, it's not that hard to get 450 to 550. Some guys are seeing 600 plus. And if anybody tells you that 600 horsepower out of a daily driver is slow, they've never ridden in one. I promise you, these trucks at the 450, 500 range are a blast. Whether you're driving to the grocery store or you're going here to California, these trucks are not, they're not hot rod trucks. You can have some fun with them, but if you're going to Ultimate Callout Challenge, you're not going to buy a VP truck. It's not what we're here to do. Back then, that's all you had. Now, for the money it would cost you to get a VP truck to that kind of level, buy a common rail. But if you're Joe average farmer, wants a workhorse that's going to start every day and never leave you stranded, these trucks are fantastic. People will complain about the pump themselves, comparatively to the P7100 again, that arguably never went bad. Unless something happened, they ran forever, sure. These pumps do have a shelf life. I mean, it all varies on the quality of fuel you run, the climate you live in, blah, 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 blah. The biggest downfall to these pumps is they were cooled by the fuel that went through them. That was their biggest downfall. And also for these trucks was the first time they decided to use a non-mechanical lift pump. The lift pump is what brings fuel from the tank to the injection pump. The old school 12-valve style was a mechanical style that ran off the cam, and these were an electric pump made by Carter. Unfortunately, the vibration of the engines were the death of these things, and the pump wouldn't get, or the injection pump wouldn't get the flow it needed to stay cool. Also, these pumps, it is very important that you keep these things between 17 and 21 psi fuel pressure. Not either side of it. Anything under 16, you're really shaving the life off the pump. Anything over 25 is actually going to damage the diaphragm inside of it. The reason that's a problem is like a lot of guys like Power Driven Diesel, shout out to you guys, they're doing these Predator mechanical lift pumps for these things that are actually belt driven, which are awesome, but they're highly adjustable. If you crank that thing up too high thinking you're making power, you're actually beating the crap out of it. I'll admit, I'm biased. I love these trucks. They're how I started, they're what I cut my teeth on, they are why I'm in the position I am now. If you're looking for a great, dependable, everyday workhorse, they're tremendous. If you can find one that's still clean, buy it. I'm tired of talking. Let's tear this truck apart. VP trucks, you probably look at this harness and get scared away. It's just not that bad. But when you're doing a swap like this, literally unplug these two plugs and take the whole thing out with it. So when we get it out on the ground, we can switch it over. It's a hell of a lot easier. These pumps are about as simple as it gets. One thing I really want to emphasize, your lines are going to come off in two sections. There's 3 and 3 and what I call clusters, I guess. Two things. Never bend these. Don't bend them out of the way and be lazy. Take them off as a complete unit. And both will have these clamps on here that hold these clusters together. Don't touch these. Don't loosen them. Don't think you can take one off. It's not worth it. It'll be a nightmare to line up. It's 6 nuts. It's totally doable. Take them off as complete units. Once your injection lines are off, you'll take off your fuel. This has a fast, so it has a barb fitting, but you could have if it's stock, you'll have a banjo fitting here. Pull the fuel line off. This is your main connector.
grab here, pull down on it, pop that off. You have 4 15mm nuts that'll hold this pump to the case. You'll have 2 13s in this bracket down here. Just leave the bracket on, take it off with the pump. Up front, you'll have your crankcase breather. Carefully spin that off, and it'll expose the shaft nut. Be careful not to lose this nut and washer into the case. It will fall through. Now we will take our gear puller. Very useful. This gear puller will work on VE pumps, P pumps, VP44 pumps, and CP3 pumps. Very versatile, not very expensive. We're going to take our 2 bolts, thread it into these holes, and you're going to just tighten them evenly, just back and forth until that gear pops off. If you look here, this bolt here should never be removed. It's torqued from the factory. Remove this rear one, pull the plate out, you'll see it's slotted. That's all you have to do. You can buy a fancy injector puller, but your truck comes with a bunch of them.
When it comes to head studs, you have a bunch of different options. In my worthless, biased opinion, you have 2 options. You can buy ARPs or you can buy jump. It's up to you. With the 24 valve set, you open your box, you'll have your instructions with your diagram, which if you pay attention, looks like a lot like the bearing clearance video, doesn't it? Ooh. Washers, 12-point nuts, an insignificant amount of ARP lube, and then your studs themselves. Coarse thread goes into the block. Fine thread is what your 12-point nut sits on. Dead giveaway, the top has a hole for an Allen wrench. With your 24 valve set, 6 of the bolts are going to be longer than the others. What I do is I pull them out of the box, set them up on end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. These go along the side of the exhaust manifold. Set this in your head, take your Allen wrench, and run this down until it touches. Don't put any torque on it, don't reef on it. As soon as you feel it hit the bottom, leave it alone. And then we'll meet you back outside.
Here you see me applying the lube. It's a common misconception that this is for the threads of the stud. It is not. This is supposed to be for the surface between the washer and the nut, so when you torque it and it turns, it's not causing any friction. Once again, from the center, working outwards in a circular motion, we're going to torque this head down in 3 steps. First step, 40 foot-pounds. Second step, 80 foot-pounds, and then a final pass of 125. On your truck, at this point, if you were just doing a head gasket, after your last pass of 125, you'd put the truck back together, fire it up, check for leaks, and take it for a test drive. Don't beat on it. Let it go through its motions. Get it up to temperature. Let the thermostats open. Drive it back to wherever your house, your shop, whatever it may be. Take the valve cover back off and run 125 again. We call that a hot retorque. If you want to go the extra mile, you do it again after 500 miles. You don't have to, but it's cheap insurance. All right, we got some new injectors from Dynamite Diesel. These are 75 over, very modest, very mild. Brand new, complete units. Nice and shiny. And looky there. Look at that beautiful Bosch emblem. All right, I messed up here. I didn't hit record. You take your injector, you have one O-ring and a copper washer on the bottom. Lube that O-ring with whatever you would like, motor oil, assembly lube, tacky grease, whatever. And you'll see on the body of the injector the little hole. That hole needs to face where your connector tube goes in. And you take the injector, set it in, and just with your thumb you should hear it click into place. It shouldn't take a lot of effort. It'll snap in, and that's all you gotta do. We're now gonna put our injector hole down back in, put the slotted side in. We're going to put our bolt in the back hole and tighten it finger tight just till it touches. And now we're going to put our crossover tube in. Lube the O-ring on the crossover tube. Place it in the hole and apply very light pressure. You will hear a little click. That's when you know it's seated. Do this step for all 6 injectors and then torque the whole down bolt to 89 inch-pounds. When you do new injectors, you're supposed to do new connection tubes. Do you have to? No. You should, but you don't have to. But that little O-ring must be replaced. For the 3 cents it costs, replace that O-ring. If anything happens to that, if it gets brittle, gets a crack, a tear, fuel will bypass it, and when the truck sits overnight, it'll lose its prime. So you'll wake up every morning and the truck will crank, then finally fire. For as cheap as it is, at least for me, replace your O-rings, please. Now we're going to put our pump back in. We're going to bar the engine over so the pump gear keyway is facing up. This will help you keep the keyway from falling into the case. As you'll see, your keyway is a Woodruff key. It'll rock back and forth as you install. Just be careful it doesn't fall out. Clean the mating surface inside the timing case and apply a little lube to the O-ring and the injection pump and set in just like that. Check and make sure your keyway is where it's supposed to be. Put your washer and your nut back on and tighten it down. This nut torques to 125 foot-pounds. Stock cast iron one-piece manifolds, over time, over many and many heat cycles, hot, cold, will actually shrink. In your 12-valve trucks, the way the heads are designed, over time it'll actually snap these ears once it gets brittle enough. And now in these 24-valve trucks, the head is a more flat plane, and then the manifold actually just ends up breaking. The good news is they all break in the same spot. The bad news is once it's on the truck, you probably aren't going to see it. Once you take it off and flip it over, they all break right here. This customer picked up a nice unit, 3-piece from BD Diesel. The 3-piece allows a thermal expansion somewhere to go. These are a lot less prone to have problems. I'm not going to go into crazy detail on this one. I'm going to wait for the Tahoe build. The only thing I wanted to put out there was when you go to buy your manifold, the 12-valve and 24-valve manifolds have different exhaust ports. So be careful you don't mix and match the two. Same idea as the head. Start from the inside working out, torque to 33 foot-pounds. Do not over-tighten them. All right, I'm gonna end this one on that. This video is way too long. I need to get this truck done so I can sleep. What did we learn? Head studs are a big thing with this. Older trucks, 150,000 mile plus, have your valve seats checked. Chances are they're cracked. You don't have to replace the head. You can get hardened seats. Not a big deal. Injection pumps, they fail. As you saw, very simple to replace. Don't be scared by them. Injectors, super simple. Great horsepower increase, well worth the time. Exhaust manifolds will break, probably are broken as we speak right now. Once again, not that bad. Guys, VP trucks are great. Don't be afraid of them. Thanks for making it this far, and let's get back on the first gen. Do it for the old man.